I'm so excited to be joined by my friend Joe. Joe, you want to introduce yourself for everyone who might not know you?
Yeah, happy to do so. My name's Joe Nassise. I run under my full name, Joseph Nassise. I've been in the industry for, wow, 25, 26 years now. My first book came out in 2000, and I've been publishing ever since. I've got about 36 books published by major New York publishers, HarperCollins, Simon and Schuster, Tor Books, Gallery, you name it. And then another 35 or so that I've done independently. Right now, I do a mix of both. I look at a project and decide where needs to go and send it there. But I write primarily urban fantasy, supernatural thrillers, and horror. My first novel was a horror novel. My latest novel was a horror novel, and everything else in between was urban fantasy and supernatural thrillers. But I love the job. I love writing. I love telling stories, and I'll keep doing it as long as they let me.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I'm assuming in those 70 books you've come up with a lot of blocks. Like what's something that has like just stymied you? Like you cut and you didn't think you could get past it.
There's been a book that I have wanted to write for probably 20 of those 25 years. I still haven't got past the ability to sit down and write it, namely because I feel like the idea is one of those ideas that I am not ready to do justice to.
Hmm.
That my own vision of my worth, my own vision of my talent isn't yet at that place where I feel like I can tackle the book and have it come out the way I want it to be. Um, and I may be right. I may be entirely wrong. It's a question of waiting until, one side of my head says, yes, give it a go. And I'll dive in and give it a go. And that's happened with other books in the past. And sometimes, it takes a couple of months to break through. Sometimes it takes a couple of years. But all the others I've managed to actually sit down and write and release and, have published. And this one book is still sitting out there. So I'll just keep it on its little shelf for a while longer until I'm ready to tackle it, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's so interesting because like I'm assuming that everyone who's listened to this has had a project they didn't feel ready to
Yeah.
like produce yet. But to hear someone who's had like 70 books released and still having the same issue or having the same block is really interesting. Especially when I talk to people, I often say like, don't make your dream project first. And they go, how dare you? What?
Right.
Like, like I want to make the thing. And I'm like, but my love, you're not good enough to make that thing yet.
Gotta
Like it's
practice a little first.
right. And you're too tied to that thing also, right? Like we end up getting tied up in our things. Like if we love Game of Thrones, like and you try to make Game of Thrones, you're not going to make it and you're going to be disappointed and then it will never get done. I find people spiral a lot and it's like the book's not good enough and they end up with this one that like spinning their wheels on that one book over and
Never
over
ending
forever.
project. Yep. Yep. It's funny. There have been two major points in my career where I thought about not continuing with the career or didn't have the capacity to continue with the career. The first one is a block that I think a lot of people get to is that they try to follow all the rules and do everything that the internet and anyone under the sun named Bob tells them to do. And there's so much there that they get jammed up.
Hmm.
Uh, Early in my career, I tried to write books in order, chapter one, then chapter two, then chapter three. And I was horrendously slow at it. It would take me a year, year and a half to get through, one rough draft. And I realized that I can't write books in order. It came to my attention that I am much faster and much better if I map out the project ahead of time, know what each chapter is going to be, and then write whatever chapter I bloody feel like writing that day. I'll write chapter one today, chapter 40 tomorrow, chapter 28 the next day, and build all the bridges to connect them later on in the process. And that sped me up like crazy. I got to the point where I was writing 4 or 5 books a year. That still isn't very fast compared to some other folks out there who do, one a month or so. But for me, that was lightning speed, right? I was suddenly the Flash when it came to writing. And that sustained my career for the next 15 or so years once I figured that out, is to give myself the grace to do it my way and not worry about what everybody else is telling me to do. And that has become kind of a baseline foundation when I coach other writers is, hey, you need to figure out what works for you and allow yourself to follow that process, because in the end, you'll be much more efficient, you'll be much more prolific, and you'll be a heck of a lot happier doing the job, because writing is a job like anything else, as we both know. You'll be happier doing the job, and it'll make your writing stand up and take notice as well. And that's really important.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, okay, someone comes to you and you're saying you should write things out of order. What do you say to someone who says like that sounds like how do I keep it all straight? Like what do I do? Like is it an editing pro like how do I get it all together at the end of it if like I wrote chapter 28 then 57 then 32 and like even putting it in order it must read like chaos.
Uh, I call my rough drafts vomit drafts for a reason, because I'm just vomiting the story out on the page and it's going to be a mess. And that's okay. I've learned to allow myself the luxury of having a chaotic mess once that first draft is done. But that first draft is filled with notes to myself. Hey, go back and add this to chapter 10, or, you need to connect this to chapter 12, or whatever it might be.
Are you doing that as you're going through? Like, are you writing like once you write chapter 10, and then let's say you write chapter like 20, and you're like, oh, I have to connect. Is it when you're writing chapter 20, you're making notes and like,
I'll put that in chapter 20, and then I will go back, and before I start a revision, I'll review all those kind of notes. And
mm,
so that note that might be in chapter 20 now gets transferred to chapter 10, so I can keep track of what I should actually be doing when I'm doing it. My secret is not my secret, my belief is a better word. I believe that as writers, we are taking readers on emotional journeys. That's our goal. That's what we should be doing as writers. And in order to do that, we need to understand the story that we are telling.
mm,
So I'm a big proponent of sitting down before you write your story, and even if it's just a rough sketch of an outline, understanding, okay, where are the big transition points in my story? Where's the point where the hero goes off on his new journey and deals with all the problems that have arisen? Where is the point where the hero understands they're opposed? There's some opposition to them, and they have to fight against that opposition in order to reach their goal. What is their goal for that matter?
mm,
Knowing those things ahead of time gives you this rough sketch of, okay, here's where the story's going to go. Now, for me, my rule is then to take that and write a couple sentences for every chapter in the book. So I'm old fashioned. I put them on index cards. I can lay them out on the table and look at the order of scenes and move them around as I see fit. But eventually, I end up with a stack of index cards with every card having a scene on it. And I can put those scenes in order, and I can say, okay, this is how my story flows. This is, I've got my key elements. I've got various acts one, two, three, and four. I've got a beginning and an ending. I've got this design now in my head, or at least on my cards that I can refer back to. Knowing that frees you up so much. It allows you to, kind of follow your North Star, get all the important pieces out and into your rough draft, but it also allows you to go down some of those bunny trails that you want to explore and add in as you go along. It never stays as that outline. It always expands, it always gets bigger, it always gets richer. But at least at any time, I can sit back and say, okay, what am I doing today?
mm,
What's the goal of this particular scene? What is this scene supposed to do for my reader emotionally? And if I can hit those high beats, I know that at least I'm on the right track. And incidentally, I lay out all my scenes, I get to the end of the draft and I've got 4 or 5 scenes left. That's telling me that's my subconscious telling me those were never needed in the first place. And I've learned to recognize and trust that instinct. My
mm,
subconscious knows much more than my conscious does about how this thing is supposed to fit together. I've read a billion books, right? The subconscious has taken all that in, and it's grown to understand, what are the good books and what are the bad books and why are they good and why are they bad and how do I avoid that in my own writing. So I always tell people start out with at least some kind of summary, even if it's a 1 or 2 page summary of where your story is going, and
Mm.
use that to guide you, particularly when you get stuck. I sit down, I'm like, I don't know what scene to write today. I'll flip through my cards until inspiration strikes. Oh, chapter 41. That one sounds like a great one to write today. And I've got a card telling me what to write. So I
Right.
don't have to stare at a blank page. I don't have to, figure it out. I've got my guide to take me along the path. When I was a really young writer, so I wrote my first novel at 19 in college to win a case of beer. It sat in a shoebox for 11 years. My wife found it, convinced me to type it up. Simon and Schuster bought it in a two-book deal, and that kind of kicked off my career in 2000. But those first few books, I would sit down, I would have no clue where I was going. I was writing them, trying to write them in order. And so, when I figured out this system of understanding what's the story I'm really trying to tell, that made a huge difference. All of a sudden I could put out more than one book a year. I could manage to handle, multiple books at a time. I'd write one book in the morning and one book in the afternoon. Whatever that process was for me seemed to work. And so that allowed me to get past a lot of my blocks. Is if I hit a block, I step back and I say, okay, where am I? I used to stop a day's writing in the middle of a page, in the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of a sentence. So it would just, the sentence would be halfway finished and I'd be done for the day.
Mm.
When I would come back the next day, I'd read what I had, and that unfinished sentence finishes itself in the back of your head, and you're off and running. You're never staring at a blank page.
Right.
That helped me get through those initial blocks of writing things in order. Then when I changed it all up and I'm able to free myself and write whatever the heck I want for that day, that made that process unnecessary. But it was a good process to have early on.
Yeah. Okay. So I just have to clarify. Like you say you wrote for chapter 41, but like the fact that it's chapter 41 is more like a guideline, right? Like it
Yeah.
could be chapter 38 or chapter 53, right?
Yeah, by the time I'm done, I've discarded some scenes, I've discarded some chapters. So then you go back in and you renumber all the chapters so they make chronological sense, right? I'm not jumping from chapter 29 to chapter 41 just because that's what they were labeled originally. I,
Hmm.
I fix that. But yeah, that they can change it. For me, an outline, a guidebook, whatever you want to call it, is a living, breathing thing. It will change as the process goes along, especially between a rough draft and a revised draft, because the rough draft shows you all the problems you have, right? Oh, I've got a plot hole big enough to drive a truck through. I guess I need another chapter here to fix that.
Right.
Okay, then that chapter gets written to fix that hole. And the
Mhm.
bridges, the transitions between one chapter or another get fixed in that second draft as well. Like, okay, he's in his car in the end of this chapter, and start of the next chapter, he's in his house. Oh, well, I need to add some lines at the beginning to get him out of the car and into the house.
Right.
Those are the kind of little brush ups that happen in between those drafts.
Yeah, I love that. I used to back when I started, I would write to the middle because I did comics. So like one of the best my favorite thing about comics is if you knew what the last page of an issue was and the first page of an issue, you could just construct what
Yep.
the middle would be. And when I
And go in
started
both directions.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then when I started doing books, I was like, well, I already know how to do this for movies. I know how to do this from comics. So like I wonder if you could just like take the major beats and just like work this way. Cause like I don't know. I know where it starts, where it ends. And so my process had always been like I would make a big bold line on the outline of like every 5,000 or 10,000 words and be like, I have to hit this.
Yeah.
But how I hit it, and I has to be around 10,000 words because like I want the story to keep moving and I don't want people to like get bored. But like the stuff I write for how we get there is more like pirate code. It's more like
Yeah.
guidelines.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets you there. but it's gonna need to be polished up, like your first draft is your vomit draft. The next draft is the polished drafts, like two rocks in an old style gemstone polisher, and they bump against each other until they're smoothed out and round and shiny. And that to me is the process of revision. We're making it palpable at that point, right? Rather
Right.
than rather than just a bloody mess.
Yeah, I think a lot of like blocks is also just being like okay with it sucking. Like people
Yeah.
always say, like, how did you make all these work? But like whether you write it in order or out of order, like you're writing it over multiple days, multiple
Yeah.
sessions. Like nothing gets written like all the way through, right?
Yep. The biggest block I had in my career was one that was completely outside my control. I caught COVID back in April 2020, long COVID in June of 2020, and long COVID took away my ability to write. And I
Mm.
couldn't write for 3 years. And by not writing, I mean I had trouble finishing sentences when I was speaking. I had trouble finishing sentences when I was writing. If I got 3 sentences out in a given day out of 6 hours of work, I would call that, a good day of work. I mean, it was crazy for a guy who had been writing 5 books a year for a decade prior to that.
Mm.
Um, and then I had a stroke. And the weirdest thing, the stroke fixed my head. Whatever was wrong from the virus, the stroke
Wow.
fixed.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, 3 years later, I could write again. And since that time, 2023, I've written 4 more books, almost finished with a fifth. I know I'm back, right? The
Mm.
kid's back. I feel like,
Right.
I've got my mojo again. But it was the strangest thing going literally in a day or two from being to articulate and sit down and have a conversation like this with you, and then the next day being wholly unable to do that. You'd ask me a question, I'd come up with, 3 words starting to reply, and then I'd forget what the question was. And
Yeah.
it was crazy. And people experience that. You experience health issues in your career that can be major blocks. And just like giving yourself the grace to do it your way, to understand that your first draft is gonna suck, right? Those things
Right.
require you to give yourself grace as a writer. Health problems are the same way. You have to give yourself grace, otherwise you'll bang your head against the wall and drive yourself nuts. And so some blocks you can resolve by fighting against them and finding, methods and means, and some blocks you just have to wait and be patient and
Mm.
and really hope that things come back.
Right.
It's really weird for me to say I feel really fortunate I had a stroke, but yeah, I feel really fortunate I had a stroke because it gave me back the career that I honestly thought was over. Blocks are funny things.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, not to get off on a weird tangent, but I'm reading the Dan Brown book, the
Yeah,
the new one, Secret of Secrets. And in it, they talk about how epileptics get seizures and it actually like opens that like conduits again that were closed to them. It's like a lot of them feel like they're like talking to God when they're doing that. So
yep,
like um, I don't know. I don't know if that, but I also had COVID and got long COVID. And mine was I could keep information during one session, but the minute that I stopped that session or like slept, it all reset. And so
yep.
I had a similar thing where like for years I just couldn't do the th I could edit things, I could write comics because like I could finish it all and people say like how do you finish an issue in a day? I'm like I literally had to. Like
Yeah,
otherwise it would be out, it would be gone from my bar. Like I would do talks and I would stand up and say like I might just zone out for like 30 seconds. Like I'm sorry, but like I can't train that away currently. And I've gotten better, but like yeah, that's like, and I know a lot. So, okay, so how did you give, I guess for someone that's dealing with that now, like this same, they're dealing with health issues, like how did you go about giving yourself that grace?
I- you know, um, so writing is um my primary employment, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I don't have a day job. I don't do anything else. And since 2005, I've been writing professionally and only writing. Um, And so, A, when that first came around, I had to figure out, well, how do I put food on the table for my family? And it was interesting to hear you say that, you could edit because that's exactly what I could do as well. I had already been working freelancing as an editor for people. So that over those 3 years became my primary way of earning money. And once I had that solved, the pressure kind of came off, like, okay, yes, it's disappointing to me that I am not writing original material of my own, that I'm not working on something new. Um, but I knew that if I pushed, all I was going to do was make that worse. And as someone with a history of depression, I knew that if I pushed and pushed and pushed, I would spiral. That would make it worse. End up in a big depressive episode, which would make it worse. So I had to sit back and kind of practically say, hey, look, you can't solve this, right? This is beyond your capability. So, what can you do to maintain your sharpness, your freshness, your interest in doing this stuff while you wait out the end result? Uh,
Hmm.
and so, by the end of those 3 years, I was sincerely looking at, hey, I'm just going to be an editor for the rest of my life. And that's okay. I'm still
Hmm.
helping people make stories. I'm still doing a lot of the stuff that I like. It just isn't, as good as I want it to be. But I was young. I'm only 57 now, so I'm like, hey, I've got a few more years ahead of me, hopefully. Maybe something will change.
Hmm.
It happened in an instant. It could be fixed in an instant for all I know. So that to me was giving myself grace, is reminding myself over and over again that this isn't the end, that there are other ways to, kind of circle around and get to the thing I want to do. Um, and like some, if I'd been in a car wreck and lost my legs, I'm gonna have to accept some of that. That's just the bottom line. There's some things that you can do and some things you can't, and you have to find peace with that. And once I found peace with that, it was much easier to get through the day to day, the week to week, the month to month of working as an editor because I knew that this was my connection to stories at this point in time.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll change in the future. Maybe it'll go back the way it was. But for right now, I just have to accept and find ways to keep that motivation within myself. And no, that's not an easy task. I mean, I'll agree with you there that it can be really tough. But if you don't do that, it's so much worse. And so that became my daily go-to is, hey, this is what you can do right now. Enjoy it.
What did the Buddha say? It's like getting hit by an arrow twice. Like you get hit by the arrow and then you do your own arrow after that. So like
Yep.
you can like you're gonna get hit by that first arrow. You might as well like just not double the damage, right?
Right. Why make it worse for yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, I also found that I could do adaptations, like of the stories that I knew well, like Sleeping Beauty or fairy tales or like Alice in Wonderland. Like these
Right.
things were like stuff I knew enough, and I didn't even need to know it. All I needed to know was like where I was, and I could reference the actual story itself and be like, okay, like I currently am doing some translations of like books to comics. And it's like, well, I'm not saying that's easy. It's not easy, but like I have the story. Like I know how to tell a story and I know the story. Like you've given me the this, you've given me the this, and like I can take these two things even when it's hard and make this thing because I don't have to. I still can't hold things in my head in the way that I used to. Like
Right.
I still remember everything before 2022 in my head, but I don't any new stuff like so any news stories just like gone and like non I started
Filter
doing
away.
yeah I started doing nonfiction because nonfiction there's a right way like there's a right way to like to like turn on a car
Yeah.
right
Right.
and like whatever the car is like you can only turn it on correctly, like one way. And like so it's like, okay, well, all you have to do is remember how to do these 5 steps and then like the car is on. And like I can write the car on thing. I can't create a car from like the fantastical idea of a car, but like I can Like I know how to like do this thing, and there is a right way to write about that. And all of those things that were like the process was innate to me, but like the brain was not thinky good. Like I ended up being able to do more.
I think the reason we could edit and not, create a story originally from scratch was the difference between the creative and analytical sides of our brains, right? So, one side, the creative side, just seemed to shut down for a while, but the analytical side kept going.
Hmm.
And I think, one of the problems newer writers always have, you just mentioned it, and I think it's worth repeating, is that, we need to understand what makes a story, and then we need to know how to put that story together. And those are both analytical issues, right? And
Right,
so, we can see those things, we can figure out those things easy enough, even when we're struggling with the creative side of it, if we understand those basic precepts.
right,
Once we know those basic precepts, they don't go away. I
right,
can still watch a movie and dissect it based on how story structure should operate because that's what my brain has been designed to do, right? That's my thing, story structure. And so, being able to understand those things also helped me to come back. It's like, all right, if I can't get to it this way, what other skills do I have that might allow me to approach it from a different, full on assault isn't going to work. I need to do this encroaching kind of a thing. But
right,
all right, how do I figure that out? And being able to approach it from a different angle was a big help for me with that problem and with a lot of other problems that I've encountered in the years that I've been doing this. Oh, I can't figure out how to finish this dang book. Book 4 of my Templar Chronicles series drove me nuts. I wrote myself into a corner and I couldn't figure out how to get myself back out of it. And the issue was, all right, how else could you approach this to figure out where you need to go? And, the typical questions, what's the worst thing you can do to your characters and all that kind of stuff, they weren't helping me as much. But looking at it from outside the box and trying a new approach eventually allowed that book to get finished, which then prompted the next 5. I'm up
right.
to book 9 in the series at this point. And if I hadn't figured out 4, there certainly wouldn't have been a 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Right, right. Yeah, I get a lot of flack from people for saying this, but like I think a big part of a writer's job is to know what objective goodness means. And
Yeah.
like to know and people are like, well, how do you know what objective goodness means? And I'm like, well, they're like, "Well, objective goodness in an entire culture, the monoculture doesn't exist. And I'm like, no, but like every culture, every genre, every story has a type of objective goodness that like you can is knowable. Like if you are going to write a sweet small town romance, objectively good in that community is like knowable. And then your job is so like you can figure out what objective goodness means for this group of people, even if you can't know it. I still think like, hey, if you're gonna make a book, you should bind it all together and glue it and like probably like put it in pages if you want to hold it and not like have it be loose leaf. Like I think that's probably all objective goodness, but like I have gotten in arguments where people do not agree to that. But if you want to know if your book is going to be broadly accepted, you can go and say, okay, I just did a book and I sent it to the I did a comic and I sent it to the creator and he did not like it. And I was like, I don't understand. These are the things that are in the book. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like you have written this very nuanced book about like war and this particular subgenre is all about male power fantasies and like that you never fail. Like you don't even think about failing. It's all fun. And I
Right.
was like, oh, I did not know that was a part of the objective goodness of this subgenre. Knowing that, I then was able to go rewrite the thing and he was like almost perfect, dude, just
Yeah.
made a couple of notes. But like if you are not doing this, if you're just like reading, you don't need to know this skill, but like I think it's like if you want to write a book in a genre, you can and you need to be able to read a book and be like, that is what is expected. That is a subversion of expectations. They're not going to like this, or this is going to be different than they want. So that when someone goes, I didn't like this part, you can go, you're not supposed to like that part.
Right,
But
right.
I literally wrote it. Like I knew that you were going to like that part, and I wrote it anyway. So like, did you like the story? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's an interesting fact in the genres I write. Urban fantasy in the 80s and 90s, when it first came about, was a lot of third person. It was a lot of, uh, heroes design aiming after a particular goal, etc. Urban fantasy in the 2000s became a subset of paranormal romance. Every character had another character that they were involved with, and you never saw that stuff in the early days. That wasn't urban fantasy, it was paranormal romance. And so for the last 10 years or so, those two genres have merged. And if you're not aware of what the target and goal is for that genre, you can no longer write to meet the needs of the readers of that genre. I write more supernatural thrillers these days because I don't have any interest in writing paranormal romance. And if
Right,
I label it as urban fantasy, the average reader is looking for paranormal romance. That becomes a problem. I'm not going to hit the mark, right?
right.
But if I change the terminology and say, okay, this is a thriller with supernatural undertones, well, now I'm hitting the mark again. It's
Right.
the same stuff I was writing 10 years before. That hasn't changed, but articulating it and aiming it at the right audience now becomes a necessity, and it allows those books to continue to be successful, 20 some odd years after I started writing those series.
Yeah, I talked to someone. I talked to art writers about book covers, and a lot, and they're like, I want this to be a book cover, and I'm like, that's not going to sell books.
Right.
And they're like, but I want it. I'm like, well, okay, so like, here's the thing: do you want to sell books, or do you want to have the cover that you want? And like, I don't care. Like, I have no opinion on this.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to tell
Right or
you
wrong
though
here.
that like if you put this book about ducks as a horror book and you put a bunch of like cute ducks on it, no one's gonna buy it because they're looking for horror books.
Right.
And like similarly, if you write a book that's inside a book about ducks and you put a shambling monster on top of it, like people are going to be really angry when they buy that book. Like you can trick anyone once, but only once
After that,
ever.
nope. Yep, I
Right.
agree. I agree.
Yeah, and I think like we
The
talked,
covers need to match reader expectations, which need to match the content inside the covers of those books. And if those three things don't go together, you're going to ultimately fail. And it's always been a kind of a thought process of mine is that if I fail once, I'm not going to sell them book two, right? I
right.
mean, if they feel like they've been cheated the first time, they're not going to try me again. And so
Mhm.
my goal is to give them what they're looking for while still adding my own inert flavor to those particular stories, and so that they get what they want, but they get a little more, and so they come back for a little more.
This is so interesting because I call this the Dresden Files problem because like Dresden Files book one is a pretty paint by numbers by the book urban fantasy,
Yep.
right? Then by book, I forget it's like six or seven or eight. He's like shooting guns and like downtown riding a T-Rex. And like you probably would not have picked up book one if you rode a T-Rex, but you're able to get like when once you have reader buy-in, you can move them more weird.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
you definitely can. And that's one of the things when I teach urban fantasy, I talk about changing one or two small things in the world to get the reader to buy into it. Oh, okay. The Fae are real creatures, and I don't want to make a deal with the Fae, and I don't want to accept food from the Fae. Okay, gotcha. I'm with you. So once they've bought into that small detail, the bigger details like, oh, there's a Fae riding a T-Rex, they'll buy into as well because they've already started that process of disbelief, of suspending their disbelief. Trying to do all that all at once, I 100% agree with you. If Harry Dresden wrote a T-Rex in book one, we probably wouldn't have had a book two because the readers would not buy into that. But they could buy into, hey, here's a little fey companion who loves pizza. Oh, that's cool. That's cute. I'll follow that along. Here's a talking skull named Bob. Well, of course, what else would you name your talking skull but Bob?
Right.
Okay, fine. Now I've bought into that stuff. So now when Bob becomes a demon that comes out of his skull, I'm okay to accept that because I bought the idea of Bob, the talking skull, with some magic all through the initial processes of the books. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on that kind of thing.
Yeah, people are really, it's really hard to get someone to believe something that is more than two standard deviations between what they think is normal. But every book, you can move them two more standard deviations
Yes.
from normal.
Yes, and the other thing that I see all the time, we're off on a tangent, but I'm going to stick with the tangent for a minute. So many writers will take that idea of, starting in the middle of things literally to heart, and they'll jump in and, the storyline will just go like this nonstop. And the problem with that is we never get to know the main character. We never get to empathize with the main character. If the first thing we saw in Star Wars was Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader, we wouldn't have cared about Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, right? We,
Right.
we hadn't had time to build up that emotional connection. And I am so often telling people when I do an editorial assessment of their manuscript that you need to start a little further back. You need to give me insight into this character's day to day. Who are they? What do they want? What do they desire? What is their life like? So when things do go suddenly take a left turn and go off into a new pathway, I'm willing to go along that road. I'm
Right.
willing to accept that and travel with them to see where the story ends because I've built up that connection early on with the characters.
Yeah, the exception to that I would call the James Bond, like, which is like James Bond, the first sequence of James Bond, every James Bond movie is like, look at how cool James Bond is. James Bond is so James Bond. And then he escapes, he does the thing, you learn it's like a little thing of the whole movie, like a little like sequence of the whole movie. And then, but like what happens in every sequence too? He goes back to London. He
Right,
like
right.
goes and says hello to
Slows
Melly Penny. Like
down.
it slows down. Yeah,
Yep,
exactly.
yep. And
Yeah,
that's where okay, you've got me excited about the story. Now I learn a little bit more in depth about who this guy is and what he's doing and why is he 007 and all that kind of stuff. And from there, I'm ready again to continue the journey with you as things ramp up and get more interesting.
absolutely. Okay, so we're nearing the end. I just want to ask you, do you have any final thoughts for people as they go off onto their own journey for breaking their own blocks or writing their own books?
Yeah, I think the big thing we talked about today that people really need to take with them is giving themselves grace for the problems they encounter. Sometimes it's enough to just give yourself that grace and the knot will unfurl itself on its own. Other times, yeah, you got to fight a little more. But if you aren't willing to give yourself some relief, to forgive yourself for some of the problems you encounter, you'll end up at that point where you'll never pick up the pen again. You'll never sit down at a keyboard again. So understanding, allowing yourself to be yourself and to deal with the struggles you have is a huge part of breaking those blocks.
I love it, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, man. I'm really glad you asked and been happy to be here.